Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome back to True Drew Podcast. I made the mistake of watching The Fault in Our Stars before starting recording, and oh my gosh, I'm a mess. I'd seen it before, but it'd been a minute. Oh my gosh, why did I do this to myself? Okay, deep breath. So, today, we're going to be talking about Nancy Drew and another mystery that she solves. This is book number 106, The Case of the Artful Crime. This book first came out in 1992. So, if you're anything like me, you probably hear the title of this book, The Case of the Artful Crime, and even when you look at the book cover, you think, okay, maybe this takes place in a museum, I don't know. It actually takes place in a restaurant, but paintings and art are at the center of this mystery. So this book cover, to describe it to you all, and if you ever want to see these book covers, I post them on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast, on Wednesdays before these episodes air on Thursdays. But on this cover, we have Nancy. She's wearing khaki shorts and this pink button-down shirt. I would totally wear this. The book itself is red and blue. I love the color scheme. And we see a man wearing a black ski mask in the background with a flashlight pointed towards a painting. You can see the tables in the restaurant around Nancy and this guy. This is a direct scene from the book. And there's a tagline that says, Nancy's working at a high-class restaurant where mystery is the specialty of the house. Bring on the food and restaurant puns. But when it comes to giving this book cover a funny cover spoof, I just said, sir, no ramen around the dining room after hours. Who doesn't love ramen? Or maybe another funny cover spoof could be like, he tripped the burger alarm. Okay, I'll stop. But when it comes to giving this book cover a rating, I would give it 4 magnifying glasses. I like the color scheme. I like the subject matter. This is an actual scene from the book, so it gets a higher rating for me. So now really quickly, I'll go ahead and list off the cast of characters that we meet in the case of the Artful Crime. So first up, we have Shawn Morgan, who is the owner of the Arizona House. That's the restaurant that is at the center of this mystery. There is Lee, the maitre d' at the restaurant, Elliot Mifflin, who's a prep cook, Jack Henry, the pastry chef, Roy, the bartender, Lorene, who is a waitress, and another waitress who is named Anne Marie, Jacques Henry, who was the owner of Chez Jacques, a restaurant that used to be where the Arizona House is now, Felice Wainwright, a River Heights aristocrat, Conrad, her butler, Gary Powell and Stella Davis, they're actors, they're briefly mentioned in the book, Auguste Spaziente, Joseph Spaziente, who is a prison painter, Sarah Glass, who was a car theft victim, Dr. Russo, Edward, who works at La Saint Tropez, and Alex Templeton. Alright, so now really quickly I'll read a synopsis for The Case of the Artful Crime. Nancy's serving tables on the night shift, and someone is serving up danger for dessert. The Arizona House is the hottest restaurant in town, in more ways than one. It has chic cuisine and a classy clientele, but someone's trying to poison the atmosphere and the food. Grease fires, slashed paintings, and a mysterious midnight intruder have set the Arizona House on a course to culinary catastrophe. When Nancy goes undercover at the restaurant, she learns that the key to the conspiracy may be sitting in the vault of a nearby mansion, the famed Dragon's Eye Ruby. Something's cooking at the Arizona House, and Nancy suspects that it may be one of the most daring criminal schemes in River Heights history. And now for a dramatically read newspaper headline synopsis. International jewel thief thwarted by local heroine. Wow, I really overdid that. But anyways, that is an actual newspaper headline from the book. So I thought it would be cool to use that. Usually I have to come up with my own, but this one came straight from the book. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and jump into the direct quotes and notes that I took for The Case of the Artful Crime. So our book starts off with Nancy taking Carson to lunch for a surprise birthday celebration for him at this place called the Arizona House, and it's a popular restaurant in River Heights. Nancy says Bess works there in the coat room, and Nancy made them a reservation. I know there are still restaurants that are fancier and have coat rooms, but coat rooms seem like such a thing of the past now. So Nancy and Carson pull up to the restaurant and go inside, but when they get up to the host stand, the Drews' reservation can't be found. In fact, the man at the desk points to a group of several other people who also had reservations, but he says they've all been botched. They can't find the reservations in the book anywhere. So Bess comes up to them, seeing that they're there, and says it's been a slow day for her because it's early May and not too many people are wearing coats. Yeah, I would say not. But then she sees the look on Nancy's face and asks what's wrong. Nancy explains that the reservation was lost, and Bess says she'll talk to Lee, the maitre d', and see what she can do. So Bess gets them a table. She's the best. You know, I actually used to be a hostess in a former life, and I worked at this restaurant that would go on a 2.5 to 3 hour wait sometimes, and I would have people try to bribe me to get them a table sooner, and I was like, I can't do that. But she tells Nancy she reminded Lee that the owner, Shawn Morgan, wants to see Nancy. He's been having some problems, and Bess told him Nancy's a detective. Nancy, though, uncharacteristically, isn't super enthusiastic about this. She says she had planned to go see Ned, and according to the book, she's had to cancel her last 5 visits to see him. Well, this kind of sounds like Nancy in Sea of Darkness. Is this the start of Trouble in Paradise? I feel like Ned would not be okay with this, the fact that she's canceled on him 5 times. Nancy does have a lot of mysteries to solve, though, and it has been a while since we've seen Ned in a book. I want to take a guess here that it was number 95, The Silent Suspect, the one where Nancy and Ned go out to San Francisco, and there's those 2 sisters, and there's arson involved. Unless he, popped in briefly in just one paragraph in one of the other books. I feel like that's the last one we really saw him in. Oh, which also, in case you're wondering, George is not in this book either, and I'm pretty sure she's on a camping trip. It'll probably pop up in my notes a little bit further into the episode. But anyways, Nancy looks around the restaurant, and oddly enough, she notices some paintings of snowy winter landscapes that don't fit in with the southwestern motif of the restaurant. Yeah, in a place called the Arizona House, you're not really picturing snow in the artwork, but according to Shawn, he bought these pictures from a friend. So Lee seats them at a table, and Bess complains that it's Siberia, and then she says that's restaurant speak for a table out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so I've mentioned in previous episodes, I think maybe, that I went to culinary school. It was a very brief stint in culinary school, but I worked in a lot of restaurants, and I'm trying to remember, certain terminology. We would say 86 that, if we were out of something, we would say put a cap on that, to put a chair at the end of a table. We had a lot of, really cool terminology. But Carson, at this point, I think he's just thrilled to get a table. He's like, this is fine. He only has an hour for lunch anyway. But also we get a description of what the waiters and waitresses are wearing at the Arizona House. Their uniform is black pants, black denim aprons, and blue denim shirts with red bandanas. That's a Tex Britain ensemble if I've ever seen one. So while Nancy and Carson are looking at the menu, Bess grabs Nancy's arm and points out a man across the room. She thinks it's Harold Brackett, the food critic for Illinois News. So here we have River Heights being portrayed as being in Illinois again, when it was being portrayed as being closer to New York in books like number 67, The Sinister Omen. Is it any wonder why we can't agree where River Heights is in the Nancy Drew fandom? Because depending on which books you've read, you would think, oh yeah, Nancy lived closer to New York, or she lived closer to Illinois, or somewhere in the Midwest. It's super confusing. But anyways, Bess says Harold Brackett reviewed another restaurant in the area, La Saint Tropez, so he's in the area. He seems to be alone, which most food critics are. The Arizona House is a new restaurant, and Elliot, the prep cook, said that Harold Brackett always wears a yellow tie, and this guy is. So Bess goes to warn Shawn. Carson notes that Mr. Brackett rarely gives restaurants glowing reviews. So Bess comes back out with the restaurant owner, Shawn, and points out Harold Brackett, who is being seated. He says he'll make him a special lunch, then Bess introduces Shawn to Nancy. She then scurries back to the coat room saying, I just saw a mink stole walk in. Can you imagine? In this weather? Have a good lunch. I love Bess. She's very funny in this book. She just has some great one-liners. But Shawn tells Nancy he thinks someone has been sabotaging his restaurant. Someone tore out pages from the reservation book, which Nancy and Carson experienced that firsthand today. Someone stuffed napkins in the exhaust fan, causing grease and smoke to pump into the dining room, and the plumbing was all backed up. And Shawn says he has no suspects. So Nancy asks if anyone else has keys to the restaurant, and Shawn says no, but he did misplace his keys the other day, and then he found them in the hall. Carson says someone could have copied them. So Shawn asks if Nancy will help, and she says she can. So I guess basically this means Ned Nickerson is on hold. I think Nancy says a few times in the book, she's like, well, if I can just solve it in a few days, then I can go hang out with Ned. But it's decided that Nancy will pose as a waitress to do this sleuthing. So Shawn goes back to the kitchen, and the Drews eat their lunch. But when Nancy looks up midway through the meal, she sees that Mr. Brackett appears to be choking. A woman named Dr. Hordell jumps up from another table to check on him, and Nancy rushes over to look at the fish Mr. Brackett ordered. Shawn also comes out and flips the fish over, and he finds a huge amount of wasabi under it. Shawn says he doesn't even use wasabi in any of his dishes, so he doesn't know how it even got there. So Bess comes up and quickly tells Mr. Brackett that the Arizona House is a great restaurant. They've just been having some problems with some pranks lately. Mr. Brackett is shocked that Bess knows who he is, but he says he guesses there's no sense in denying it. Shawn also apologizes and offers the critic a new meal on the house. But Lorene is the waitress that was the last person to touch the fish, and she served it straight to Mr. Brackett. Could she have sabotaged the fish? Carson also says later that the Arizona House was another restaurant a few years ago called Chez Jacques. It was a great place, and then when Le Saint Tropez opened, it went downhill and it closed. And you know what? I'm pretty sure I remember Chez Jacques being mentioned in one of the mysteries that we've already covered on the podcast. I just could not for the life of me remember which one it was. At first I thought it was the Clue in the Ancient Disguise, but I looked back and Nancy went to some Italian restaurant called Marco's in that book. So if anybody can help me out with that one, I would love to remember what book it was mentioned in previously, because I keep pretty detailed notes, but I feel like there's so many random, crazy restaurant concepts in River Heights that it's hard to keep track of all of them. But there was like a pirate-themed one. There was a cowboy-themed restaurant that I think Nancy and Ned went to in the Haunted Carousel. No shortage of places for them to go on their date nights. But anyways, Nancy and Carson leave. He goes back to work, and then Nancy goes back to work her dinner shift as a waitress. Which I think Nancy is a waitress in the CW show also. I've only watched a few episodes of that, and I can't wait to cover that later on the podcast also. But Lorene, of course, the mean waitress, is not happy to see Nancy there. And she asks, "Who hired you?" And then says, "Didn't she see Nancy at lunch?" Nancy explains that yes, she was there, and yes, Shawn hired her on the spot. Lorene says that's great, and then she says she's going to go talk to Mr. Wonderful right now. Yeah, that was deep sarcasm, and she is not happy that Nancy is there. But Nancy talks to Bess briefly, and then she goes to find Shawn to ask him about Lorene. He says she's kind of like a manager to the waitstaff and hires and fires new servers, but she'll get over it. He's her boss. Will she though? Will she though? She seemed pretty mad that Nancy was there. Gosh, this is bringing back deep memories of when I worked in this restaurant, which I worked in several, but the one that I mentioned earlier, there was this girl that worked with me. I don't even remember her name, but I just remember how she made me feel. She was one of the most catty people I have ever met. Let's just call her Debbie. But I remember the first day that I was going into work at this restaurant, she had apparently told my manager, and this is what's so crazy about this entire story, because Debbie and I were not close friends. We had met in training and we were casual acquaintances, like most of the other people on the staff. And this was this restaurant's grand opening, but she told our manager that she didn't think I was showing up. Based on what? She didn't even know me. And what was crazy was, meanwhile, I was parking my car and I was showing up 10 minutes early for my scheduled time to be there. And I get out of my car and I see that I have a voicemail, and it's this angry, raging message from our manager saying, "You're not very dependable and I can't believe that you would do this to us." And I was like, what on earth is happening? So I show up. And then the manager just profusely apologizes to me. And he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Debbie here. She thought you weren't coming." And I just looked at Debbie and she was just smirking the entire time. And this is just scary. Like, the fact that people like this can blatantly lie about you and other people will believe them, those kinds of people are dangerous. And they're really in every work environment, not just restaurants. But ooh, the interactions between Lorene and Nancy in this book were giving me some major flashbacks. Because if I had been witty enough with my comebacks back then, like I am now, I probably would have been like, "Wow, I didn't know that Debbie, who barely knows me, is such an authority on my life and character."
Debbie, or whatever your name is. I hope wherever you are in life now that you're a better person. Rolling 500 rolls of silverware shall be your penance. Sorry, I'm dumping all the restaurant tea today on the podcast. So Nancy next meets Roy, the bartender, and then Bess shows her around the kitchen, and she whispers to Nancy that she's about to introduce her to the grouchiest human alive. His name is Jack Henry, and he's the pastry chef. He barely acknowledges them when Bess is like, "Hey, this is Nancy Drew." I was also around chefs like this in my stints in kitchens. They could be very mean, but they could make the best raspberry tart that you have ever tasted. Nancy also gets to meet Elliot Mifflin, the prep cook. He has glasses and is in his 20s. And Jack yells at Elliot to go get him some maraschino cherries from the bar, and Elliot nervously runs off to do that. Nancy makes the comment to Bess that Elliot reminds her of the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. I guess it's because of the spectacles, the glasses he's wearing. He's very nervous and just like, oh, that's the only thing I can think of. As they stop laughing, though, Nancy notes that she smells smoke all of a sudden. And when she and Bess look over, they see that the linen closet where the napkins and tablecloths are kept is on fire. So Nancy tries to put it out with the fire extinguisher, but it's empty. They try to go out the back door since the linen wardrobe is blocking the way to the front of the restaurant, but the back door is locked. So Nancy thinks fast and she sprays herself and Bess with water from the kitchen sink and then soaks 2 napkins so they can hold them over their mouths and noses. Just in time, though, Shawn, Lee, and a waitress come in with fire extinguishers and tamp the flames down. Nancy feels sick from inhaling all the smoke and she has to sit down after they escort her and Bess into the dining room. Lorene just sneers at her and says, "I see it took you all of a half hour to get into trouble." And Shawn tells her to knock it off. Jack and Elliot come up next, and Nancy asks if either one of them smokes, and they say no. Jack says there's no smoking allowed in my kitchen, and Nancy notes that he seems a little possessive because the restaurant is technically Shawn's. Jack says he had to go find Elliot because it was taking him so long to find the cherries. So Nancy talks to Shawn, and the fire department is on the way, and he's afraid he'll get some fines because the sprinkler system didn't work when it was supposed to. He notes that it was deliberately turned off, and the fire extinguisher in the kitchen was bone dry. Shawn says he leaves the back door unlocked because they're constantly getting deliveries, so anyone could have walked in and started the fire. But the door was locked when Nancy and Bess tried to get out. He tells Nancy to have Lee call all the people with reservations that night because they can't serve anyone. The restaurant now reeks of smoke, and he says to tell Lorene everyone can go home. So Nancy talks to Lee and Bess for a second, and Bess says Lorene made everyone go down to do inventory downstairs because she can't stand to see them not working. And Elliot defends her, saying she's actually really nice. She's just been irritable lately. Nancy asks why, and he says he doesn't know. That's when Elliot remembers where he knows Nancy from. He remembers that she's a detective. So he asks if she's investigating the weird things going on at the restaurant, and Nancy quickly says no. Now thankfully, Elliot volunteers to go tell Lorene everyone can leave, so Nancy is spared from that interaction, and Bess goes to tell Lee to cancel all the reservations. Shawn says he was fined $1,000 by the fire department after they leave. Ouch. So whoever is sabotaging this restaurant is causing him a lot of problems and costing him money. He also tells Nancy he's counting on a big event later that week. He explains that Felice Wainwright, a River Heights socialite, bought a very expensive ruby called the Dragon's Eye Ruby from a famous celebrity couple, Gary Powell and Stella Davis, after their divorce. She's apparently rented out the Arizona house for this charity gala, and he also mentions that Felice's security system at her house was tripped the other night, but he's sure it's nothing. Now, as we all know, these little details that are thrown into the Nancy Drew books are never just nothing. So Nancy and Bess go to leave after Shawn says he needs to go make a phone call, but then Bess remembers she wants to pick up her paycheck. So they go up to his office, and outside of Shawn's office, they hear him and Lorene arguing, and she says, "You've ruined my life with your lies. You'll be sorry you did all of this to me. I'll make you pay, Shawn Morgan, no matter what." Ooh, suspect number 1. So Lorene storms past them, and Bess tells Shawn when he's shocked to see them there that she was just coming to get her paycheck. Shawn grabs it for Bess, and Nancy apologizes for overhearing, but she goes a little further and says she thought Lorene didn't have a reason to be mad with him. Because when Nancy first agreed to take on the mystery for Shawn, the first question was, of course, is there anyone who's holding a grudge against you? And he said, no, I can't think of anybody. But Shawn confesses that he and Lorene actually used to be engaged, but he broke it off. Ooh, that's some real piping hot tea. Like, pull the kettle off the stove eye and ready the teacups because dang. But Shawn says when he and Lorene were engaged, he saw an ugly side of her that was insanely jealous. Anytime Shawn would hire a waitress, Lorene would flip out and think he wanted to go out with them. So Lorene was mad Shawn hired Nancy for the exact same reason, even though they're no longer engaged. Shawn also says he and Lorene were from Arizona, hence the name of the restaurant, I guess, and Shawn thinks the only reason she hasn't quit is because she's trying to save up to move back to Arizona. So Nancy asks if Shawn is absolutely sure Lorene couldn't be trying to sabotage the restaurant, and Shawn says she wouldn't do that. Lorene, had they gotten married, would have been a part owner. I mean, okay, yeah, she would have been a part-time owner, but isn't that a motive? Like, she would have been, she's no longer going to be. And we gotta backtrack for a second. The fact that Lorene thinks that Shawn would want to be with Nancy is a little bit, like, that kind of throws Shawn's character into question. But I mean, jealousy is kind of crazy and not always founded in complete logic. But Nancy's 18. I'm assuming Shawn is in his mid-20s to early 30s. So Nancy next asks if Elliot or Jack could be guilty of the sabotage. They were the last ones in the kitchen and they could have started the fire. But Shawn says no. In fact, he hired Jack, so if anything, he should be grateful. Whatever that means. Now, about that time, Roy comes by and he says 2 bottles of vodka are missing after doing the inventory with Lorene. Nancy wonders if that could have been the accelerant that started the fire. So Nancy and Bess leave the restaurant and Nancy says aloud, what if Shawn could be guilty and trying to collect on insurance money? And Bess says Shawn is too nice for that. Oh, and you know how I said I think I explained why George is absent from this book? Here it is in my notes. George, the book explains, is gone on a camping trip. See, I love when they do this. I just like to know, you know? If Ned, Bess, or George are absent from a mystery with Nancy, I just want an explanation, even if it's a brief one. So Nancy and Bess drive past the Wainwright mansion on their way back to Bess's house. Nancy drops Bess off and then she goes home. Hannah, according to the book, is on a week-long trip to see a friend in Chicago. Good for Hannah. She gets a little vacation. I love whenever Hannah gets to take some time for herself. But Nancy goes to bed since Carson is working late. Later, Nancy wakes up and Carson is back home, and he shows Nancy an old menu from Chez Jacques before the restaurant was made into the Arizona house. Nancy sees a picture of Jacques and she swears it's Jack Henry from the restaurant, the pastry chef. Carson says it's possible Chez Jacques was known for its amazing pastries. So Nancy can't go back to sleep after this, so she dresses in all black for a stakeout and she drives back to the restaurant. She leaves a note for Carson. This is so funny because 10, 15 plus books ago, Nancy was still asking Carson for permission for things, and she still will from time to time, but this time she's like, no, I'm going on a stakeout. I'm going to wear all black and look like a ninja and stake out this restaurant in the middle of the night. But when Nancy gets there, Shawn is still there because of cleanup, and he asks what she's doing there. Nancy says she wanted to stick around and see if anyone came by after hours. So she takes this opportunity to also ask about Jack, and Shawn says yes, Jack used to own the place that was there before the Arizona house, Chez Jacques, and he and his father were partners. But Jack wasn't a businessman, and when Shawn's dad died, the restaurant suffered. So once Shawn got out of culinary school, he bought the place from Jack. Shawn says there's no way Jack is guilty, though. So Nancy says she wants to hide in the restaurant to see if she can catch the saboteur, and Shawn says he doesn't like that idea. It doesn't sound safe. So Nancy changes tactics and says she left her sweater in the coat room, so Shawn lets her in. While she's in there, she rigs the door to where it won't lock behind her so she can get back inside. Nancy then pretends to drive off, but then circles back to the restaurant. She hides her car behind the dumpster and sneaks across the lot when a bright light flashes on her. Now, thankfully, it's only a motion detecting light, and Nancy hides in the darkness. Then she runs to the front door. She lets herself into the front door, and then she hears a crash in the kitchen. So, reading this whole section, the suspense was killing me. But Nancy slowly opens the kitchen door a crack and she sees a shadow. I'm thinking a shadow of a person, but it's a mouse. But then she hears scuffling in the walk-in fridge, which is also open. Shawn wouldn't have left that open, that would spoil all his product. But Nancy also sees there's a cage sitting in the kitchen. Maybe that's what the mice came out of? But Nancy goes over to the walk-in and she sees more mice inside eating some apples. So someone left the door open and then put some mice out as more sabotage. Shawn will have to call an exterminator, the mice will eat his product, and if the health inspector finds out, not good. But then Nancy suddenly feels that someone is close. I'm picturing like the hair on the back of her neck standing up, and then 2 hands shove her into the walk-in and lock her in. Ugh, this gave me chills, and Nancy is going to get pretty chilled in there too if she doesn't get out soon. I will say this though, having worked in many restaurants, going into the walk-in was always a good idea to beat the summer heat or to scream and let off steam when you had rotten customers though. You just don't want to lock yourself in there. So Nancy looks for a way out and she sees an alarm button, so she climbs up on a crate of tomatoes and she pushes it, but of course the only person who's going to hear that is the person who pushed her in there in the first place. After a few minutes though, the walk-in door clicks open and Nancy realizes the person does have a conscience and is letting her out, but is probably running off so they can't be seen. So Nancy barges out of there. She chases a man into the parking lot and she gets a glimpse of dark hair and a knit hat before he's gone into the darkness. But he's out there because a car doesn't start. So this is what Nancy does, which I would not do, but instead of getting in her car like a sane person and going to the closest phone, she goes up to Shawn's office and calls him from there. Which, I mean, yeah, that's the closest phone probably, but no! What if the person comes back and decides to finish you off? A la mode. Absolutely not. I mean, at the very least, Nancy, barricade yourself in there and grab a knife from the kitchen. That's what I would do. Also, Shawn doesn't even pick up the phone, so Nancy has to leave a message. So Nancy goes back downstairs and she sees a storm is raging outside. Great. This is just perfect. So we're in a pitch black restaurant where we were just attacked and there's a storm going on outside. And that's when Nancy thinks to herself, oh, I need to go close the walk-in door. I mean, yeah, all that food's gonna get spoiled, but do we have to? I feel like Bess Marvin in this moment, no, let's not. Let's leave the creepy, deserted restaurant and go somewhere else. So on the way, Nancy looks into the dining room and she sees another figure. Nancy's afraid they've heard her, but thankfully they haven't. Because this person, they do have a knife. Oh gosh, this was so scary to read. But Nancy notes that this can't be Jack. He's not built the same way, but it does look like a masked man. And then the man raises the knife and starts slashing the paintings on the walls, the ones that are snowy and seem like they're out of place in this restaurant that's Southwest themed. Yeah, that would be all I would need to see, and I would take off in the other direction. So Nancy thankfully does that. She goes out to her car quickly, and on the way, she sees a black sedan in the lot. The masked intruder's car, maybe? The license plate is RV5289. Nancy sees the man get in the car a few minutes later, but still can't tell who he is. So she decides to follow him with her headlights off. And the person slows near the Wainwright mansion, and Nancy has to keep going so she doesn't seem suspicious. She sees the car pass again later, so she follows them again. But this time, the person seems to know that they're being followed because they speed up. So Nancy chases the sedan in her Mustang. It ends up going into the lot of a car wash and pulling through the car wash. So Nancy parks near the car wash's exit so she can see who is driving the sedan when they come out. But when the car rolls out the other side, the driver is just gone. So Nancy gets out to check, and the keys are still in the ignition. She gets them out and checks the trunk, but it's empty too. So Nancy runs back inside the car wash, and the attendant yells at her, so she explains what's going on. So he turns on all the lights inside the car wash, but there's no one in there. The guy gave Nancy the slip. So Nancy gives the guy the keys and says she'll call the cops, and she also asks if she can be contacted if the driver returns for the car. The attendant says he will, and when Nancy asks for a description of the driver, the guy's reluctant to give it to her. But he eventually says the guy was wearing dark glasses and a cap, which seems weird to be wearing at night, but he says, we don't ask questions around here. It's kind of a rough neighborhood. He also says his hands looked like plastic, so Nancy deduces he was probably wearing gloves, so there will be no prints in the car. So Nancy finds another phone and she calls Shawn again, and when she gets his answering machine, he's recorded a message for her that says, Nancy, I got your message. I'm at the restaurant. Please come down or call me as soon as you hear this. So Nancy goes back to the Arizona house and the police are there filing a report. Nancy tells Shawn everything and admits that she came back and rigged the front door to get in. She says she thinks the two guys were not working together but separately. Shawn is upset at Nancy, but he does admit that she got some good clues. So he makes Nancy some hot chocolate while she looks at the slashed paintings. There are 6 total, but one of a lake has the most damage. It has a very precise section cut out of it, while the others were kind of slashed at random. But as much as Nancy looks around, she can't find that specific piece of missing canvas on the floor. So Nancy asks Shawn where the paintings came from, and he says Felice Wainwright. You know, for somebody who's hired Nancy to be a detective and solve this case, Shawn has been the least forthcoming person I think I've ever seen in one of these mysteries. He lied about Lorene, he lied about Jack, he mentioned that the paintings were from a friend, but he really didn't give too many details on that. But according to him, the paintings were done by a prisoner named Joseph Spaziente. He's in Miss Wainwright's art program for model prisoners. Interesting. But after a minute, the police come over and they say they've done their report, unless Shawn wants to add anything other than the 7 paintings, and Nancy is startled and goes to look at the 7th painting because she thought there were only 6. It's the same scene of a lake, but in summer instead of spring, and the same triangle piece of canvas is missing from this painting too. What does the slasher/thief want to hide? Or are they looking for something? So Nancy goes back to the restaurant for her shift the next day, and Shawn is exhausted. He didn't even go home last night. He had to clean up and call an exterminator. He also replaced the paintings with pictures of the Grand Canyon, which honestly probably fit the motif just a little bit better. But Shawn adds that Jack hasn't been picking up, and he's been calling and calling him, and he hasn't shown up for work. Nancy asks for his number and address, and while he goes to get it, Nancy talks to Lorene. Lorene is cold to Nancy, and Nancy deliberately taunts her, saying Shawn is cute to get a rise out of her and get her to talk. Whoo, Nancy is playing with fire with this one. But Lorene says Shawn needs to just give up the restaurant so they can be together in River Heights or Arizona. When Shawn comes back, Lorene storms off and Nancy says Lorene still wants him and Shawn just shakes his head. This is one romantic relationship that Nancy does not need to get in the middle of. But Nancy and Shawn agree Mrs. Wainwright needs to be paid a visit, so Nancy calls her up under the guise of being interested in Spaziente's paintings. The socialite gives her directions and asks her to come to the house now. So Bess convinces Shawn to let her go because it's warm and no one will be wearing coats anyway. So Nancy and Bess head over to the mansion and a butler sees them in. They see a Spaziente painting and Bess says he must be in a rut because they all look the same to her. This painting is the same lake and woods from the paintings at the restaurant, but in fall. So Mrs. Wainwright breezes in and she says hello to them, and she goes on and on about Joseph's talent and how he was wrongly incarcerated. Bess asks point blank what he was arrested for, and Felice says he robbed a bank. And Bess is like, yeah, that's still a crime. So Nancy asks if she can have the painting, and before Felice can say yes, a man says it's his and walks into the room. He says his name is Auguste Spaziente and his nephew Joseph is the painter. Nancy thinks the man looks like he could be wearing a wig and he looks sort of familiar to her. But Auguste says the painting is his and he can help get his nephew's name out there. He also tries to flatter Mrs. Wainwright by talking about her beauty, and Bess whispers to Nancy he's laying it on really thick. So then he compliments Nancy and Bess too. He's like, oh, I'm so lucky to be around 3 beautiful women. But Mrs. Wainwright says the painting was a gift to her from Joseph and she couldn't possibly part with it until 2 days later. She says she wants to show this painting and several others at the Arizona house to the international art crowd. She's trying to help create this art career for Joseph Spaziente, and she wants to show all his other paintings at the Arizona house as well, and Nancy just grimaces, thinking about the ripped and shredded paintings. Little does Felice know, but Auguste reluctantly says he can wait 2 days and he sees himself out. So Nancy asks Felice if Joseph ever mentioned his uncle, and she says no, but he's not very talkative. So Nancy and Mrs. Wainwright get to talking, and the socialite invites her to the next art class with the inmates. She says they're all nonviolent offenders, but security will be tight. She'll get Nancy a clearance pass. Bess is invited too, but she has to work. So as they leave the mansion, Nancy tells Bess she swears she's seen Auguste Spaziente before. Now back at the Arizona house, Shawn asks Nancy if she can serve Mr. Brackett, who is back for a redo and to do another restaurant review. And Lorene is not happy about Nancy getting to have the table. So Nancy goes to ask Mr. Brackett what he wants to drink, and he recognizes her from the other day and orders some wine. So Nancy goes to get it and carries it back to the critic's table, but just before she gets there, Lorene walks by carrying a tray of food, and she hooks Nancy's ankle with her own foot, causing her to fall and spill the wine everywhere. Luckily, none of it gets on Mr. Brackett, but he jumps up and he gets Nancy a glass of water and checks on her while Lorene just smirks. She is so evil. But the critic says disasters seem to be plaguing the restaurant, and he asks what he can expect next and jokes about earthquakes and tidal waves, and Nancy laughs. Lorene just snaps that Nancy is the only disaster there and walks off. She is so horrible. But Mr. Brackett saw everything happen. He knows Lorene tripped Nancy. He also asks about the paintings that are gone from the walls, and Nancy decides to tell him Shawn just wanted to get some pieces that fit the decor better. So Nancy goes to get him a new glass of wine, and Roy notices her hands are shaking. He tells her to calm her nerves and it'll be okay. So Nancy takes the wine back to Mr. Brackett and then gets him the seafood burrito that she recommended. But as she crosses the dining room, she starts to feel dizzy and she passes out, dropping the tray. When Nancy wakes up, she's in the hospital, which this floored me. Nancy in the hospital? This very rarely happens in the books. And Carson and a Dr. Russo are there. They say they ran tests and Nancy had traces of a drug called Seconal in her system. Could Lorene or Brackett have put it in her glass of water? The only other thing Nancy had before that was orange juice at breakfast. So Nancy is sent home to rest, and the next day Bess checks on her. She tells Nancy Shawn and Lorene had a huge fight because another waitress told him Lorene tripped Nancy. So Shawn fired Lorene and Mr. Brackett stormed out. Bess also says she got Lorene's address for Nancy. And Jack still hasn't been at the restaurant. So Nancy and Bess end up going to the library to do some research, and Nancy sees an article about Felice buying the Dragon's Eye ruby, which was once owned by emperors. This kind of reminded me of Prudence Rutherford in the game Secret of the Scarlet Hand. She had like a fire ruby necklace or something. Nancy also sees an article about the Arizona house that has a picture of Shawn and Lorene looking very much in love, and another article about Mrs. Wainwright's security system tripping. It's funny that made the news. Like, oh my goodness, this rich socialite's security system isn't working. Slow news day, huh? There's also an article about Joseph Spaziente robbing a bank. And a little bit of a forewarning here, but he was caught after being shot in the leg by police, and his getaway van took off without him. The people that were working with him to rob this bank, they just left him high and dry. Bess also finds an article written by Harold Brackett, the food critic, where he talks about memories of Coney Island with his brother, eating hot dogs, and riding a certain ride at 10 years old. But Nancy says the Harold she met was in his 30s, and he wouldn't have been old enough to ride that ride. I think she even says the ride isn't there anymore. But Nancy wonders if the Harold Brackett she met could be an imposter. So next, Nancy and Bess go to Lorene's, and she lives on the 11th floor of an apartment building. And they're in luck because a plumber is coming out of her apartment, so Nancy just pretends that it's theirs. They snoop around and they find Lorene's phone bill. She calls home a lot in Arizona, and there's a message on the answering machine from Edward at La Saint Tropez asking her to call him. Could she be sabotaging her ex-fiance's establishment? Could she be working in cahoots with somebody at La Saint Tropez? But just then, Bess warns Nancy Lorene is back. So Nancy and Bess have to climb out the fire escape and scale down 11 floors. Yikes. But when Nancy gets home, she finds an envelope slid under her door. Looks like it's another threatening note. And it says, "Give up, Nancy Drew, while you still can." Nancy notices that the I's and the C's are written funny, and the paper the threat was written on was of very good quality. I love that even though Nancy is being threatened, like her life is in danger, she still takes the time to be like, you know what? This is excellent paper. This stationery is fantastic. I should really ask them where they get this from. So Nancy goes to the community center next and the prisoner's art class, and Felice introduces her to Joseph Spaziente, and we also learn that Felice studied art in Rome for a few years. I was beginning to wonder if these classes in her charity were purely humanitarian or if she actually had some kind of art background. But Nancy notices Joseph is working on the same lake and woods scene, this time set in winter. Felice asks him about the painting he gifted her, and he says he wants his uncle to have it, and she's visibly upset by this. She asks if he can wait until after the auction to get it because she's trying to help him with his art career, and Joseph has a fit and throws stuff off of the table, and guards have to restrain him and take him from the room. So Nancy muses after Mrs. Wainwright walks off that Joseph and his bank robbing team turned off a high-level security alarm. Felice has one in her house also. Could there be a connection there? So Nancy picks up all the books about art that Joseph knocked off the table, and she sees a note that says, "Final Quadrant, Winter." Then another note that says, "Joe, what's taking so long? Must see your latest work. Where is it going to end up? Everything is set. You won't be sorry. Your loving uncle." August Spaziente. But then as Nancy stares at the note, she sees that the I's and C's are written similarly to the ones in the threatening note that she got. So Auguste has been threatening her. Now meanwhile, Felice is apologizing to Joseph, even though he's the one who had the outburst, and saying she'll get Auguste the autumn scene she has and the winter scene as soon as Joseph is done with it. So he says he'll have it done by the end of the class. And Felice says, "So quickly?" And then Joseph says, "I've painted it enough times." And then he turns to Nancy and says, "Get her away from me, would ya? I can't work with her breathing over my shoulder." Wow. Super rude. So Nancy next calls Shawn from a payphone and he tells her Jack still hasn't come into work and he hasn't picked up when he's called him, so he's really concerned. So Nancy decides to go by Jack's house. She rings the doorbell, but that's when she sees there's no car in the driveway. So Nancy goes around to the back of Jack's house and sees a window is slightly open. She opens it more and is able to unlatch the back door and let herself into Jack's kitchen. She sees there are pictures of him at Chez Jacques everywhere and pictures of him with celebrities who dined there. It's easy to see that the restaurant was his life. Just then, though, Jack comes in the back door and he's furious to see Nancy there. He tells her he's calling the police and Nancy tells him he can go ahead, and while he's at it, he can tell them he tried to burn down the Arizona house and he almost killed her and Bess too. So at that statement, Jack flounders and he admits to the fire, but he says he never meant to hurt anyone. He also admits to the wasabi on the critic's fish, the plumbing disaster, the mice, and the reservation book, but when Nancy brings up the slashed paintings, Jack is dumbfounded. He's also shocked when Nancy accuses him of working with Lorene and trying to drug her. He says he did also push Nancy into the walk-in though, but he let her out because he isn't a cruel man. But he had nothing to do with the slashed paintings or Nancy being drugged. Jack also tells Nancy that Shawn's father was cheating him out of money for years to the tune of thousands of dollars. He was putting money into an account called ABC Beverages, which doesn't exist, aka his own pocket. That's why Jack says he was sabotaging the place in the hopes of buying it back. So Nancy asks if Jack ever told Shawn about his father's embezzlement and he says no, like father, like son. Jack also says he was avoiding the restaurant because he thought Nancy was on to him and had told Shawn. Nancy says no, Shawn wouldn't believe Jack would do something like that and he likes him, which then makes Jack feel bad. So Nancy leaves and goes to the Arizona house after this to talk with Shawn. Lee asks her how she's feeling as she goes up to his office, and Nancy says fine. Nancy is just about to talk with Shawn when Mrs. Wainwright comes upstairs and says the auction dinner is canceled. But then Felice sees Nancy there and asks what she's doing, and Shawn quickly says booking the restaurant for her engagement party. Felice accepts this as fact and then says she's heard some horrible things about the restaurant lately, like about the overly spiced fish and the fire department being called, and Shawn says they had some electrical issues and a small fire, not a big deal. He also spins a yarn about how the customer ordered their fish extra spicy and couldn't handle it. This guy is the master of the spin. So Felice asks about Spaziente's paintings. She says she didn't see them in the dining room, and Shawn lies and says he sent them out to be framed. And then he says, actually, why don't they just bring the party to Felice's house and cater it there? And Felice goes with it. She says Auguste actually showed up at her house wanting the 2 paintings of Joseph's that she has, but this annoyed her and she told him he could wait 12 hours. But Nancy warns Felice that Auguste shouldn't be taken lightly and she might want to have added security at the auction dinner in case he tries to steal the paintings or the ruby, and Mrs. Wainwright says no one could possibly steal the ruby, it's too well protected. Says the woman whose security system just got tripped and had an article about it in the newspaper. But anyways, Felice leaves and Shawn says they can still keep the restaurant open and do the auction dinner so they'll make double the money. Shawn also reasons that if someone puts a bomb in the dishwasher or something, at least that way the auction dinner will be okay. The thought of a bomb in a dishwasher made me laugh. But Nancy also tells Shawn about Jack and he takes it surprisingly well. He says he always wondered why his dad seemed to have more money than Jack when he was growing up. He just says he figured that Jack just wasn't a good businessman. But Shawn asks if Nancy can work at the restaurant during the auction dinner to keep an eye on things, and she says she will. So after this, Nancy decides to go to La Saint Tropez to try and talk to Edward, but she runs into Lorene coming out of the restaurant. She asks what Nancy is doing there, and Nancy asks her the same thing, and Lorene just leaves in a huff. Edward isn't there though, so Nancy goes to the Arizona house. Elliot, meanwhile, is actively freaking out because Mr. Brackett is back in the dining room. So Nancy goes out to him and he asks her if there are any Joseph Spaziente paintings in the restaurant. Nancy says no and then leaves his table so he can order. But after this, Nancy and Bess go to the bathroom so Bess can fix her French braid and Nancy updates her on the case. Bess has to go when people come in with coats, and she accidentally leaves her small bottle of hairspray on the counter, so Nancy puts it in her pocket. But as Nancy comes back out of the bathroom, Anne Marie asks if she's seen Mr. Brackett anywhere. She took him his drink and he was just gone. But then at that moment, Lee comes up and says he found a piece of paper the critic dropped. Nancy takes a look at it, and it's the same kind of paper her threat was on. The number 4 is written over and over again, and the name Wainwright is on the paper. And the I's and C's are the same as from the threatening note. So Nancy wonders if August Spaziente and Harold Brackett are being impersonated by the same person. So Nancy tries to call the Wainwright mansion, but the call won't go through. So Nancy tells Bess to keep trying while she runs to her car. Nancy arrives at the mansion, and Conrad, the butler, says Felice is talking to a gentleman. So Nancy runs to the drawing room and she peeks in. Harold Brackett is there. Felice says he's welcome to buy the paintings, but he can have them after the party. And then Harold pulls out a gun. He trains it on Felice, and Nancy sneaks in and grabs a marble parrot bookend. She's about to smash it down on Brackett's head, but then he senses she's there and knocks her down. Conrad comes knocking at the door after he hears all these noises, and Harold tells Felice to get rid of him, so she does. She tells him everything is fine and closes the door. Now Harold, it turns out, is August Spaziente, who he's been impersonating, but his actual name is Alex Templeton. So Nancy says he wants the paintings because something is hidden in them, and he says she's very clever. He also says he wants the ruby. Felice says she can't even get to the ruby, and that's when Alex says Joseph Spaziente designed the same security system that now protects the ruby. Alex was involved in the bank robbery with Joseph, and this whole time, Joseph has been drawing their circuitry for the security system and has been hiding it under the trees in his paintings. So he asks for the other paintings and then cuts the parts out that he needs. He wipes them down with turpentine, and the plans are revealed. Alex admits to drugging Nancy and slashing the paintings. He says Nancy was annoying, poking into his affairs, and says, "Don't you have a prom to go to or something?" Oh my gosh, that is such a fantastic line. But if I were Nancy, I would be like, no, I have an engagement party. I booked it at the Arizona house. But Alex leads Nancy and Felice at gunpoint to this attic-like space that he says are servants' quarters. He found them when he was trying to case the Wainwright mansion. He's the one that tripped the security system. Nancy and Alex get in a scuffle on the stairs, but it's not enough. He locks them up there, but Felice tells Nancy there is a dumbwaiter they can try to escape through. So Nancy looks in it and she sees that the dumbwaiter is gone, but she says she'll scale down the shaft. Felice tells her to be careful. It's 4 stories down. On the second story, though, the door comes out behind a painting, so Nancy should try to get out that way. She does, and then goes to the room next door where Alex has meanwhile gotten the ruby out of the vault. Nancy sees him getting away, but also smells a fire. Alex set fire to the stairs going to where Felice is. So Nancy yells to Conrad to call the fire department, and she chases after Alex through the party. She tackles him, and they scuffle, and security guards and Felice show up and arrest him. Nancy ends up in the paper. The ruby is sold for $1 million, and Felice is going to donate the proceeds to a hospital wing. Shawn and Lorene end up making up, and Shawn takes Jack on as a partner for the restaurant. And the real Harold Brackett is going to review the Arizona house. Finally. And that is the end of this book. So now let's go on to a little segment that I like to call What's Cookin'. In this book, there weren't nearly as many mentionings of food as I thought there was going to be because it's set at a restaurant, but we did get mentionings of mesquite grilled salmon, a seafood burrito, hot chocolate, and Chardonnay. Now let's go on to a little segment that I like to call Add That to Your Resume. So I put squeaky clean suspect apprehender. Nancy literally ran through a car wash after the bad guys. And I've already put waitress on her resume way back when we did Mystery of the Tolling Bell, so I'm just going to say smart waiter. Nancy was very smart and she escaped via a dumb waiter shaft. That's a new one. So now really quickly, let's talk about the things I liked and the things I didn't like about the case of the Artful Crime. So the things I liked, I really enjoyed the restaurant setting for this mystery, and I liked the twists and turns. I liked all the suspects. I thought it was very well written. There really wasn't anything I didn't like. So when it comes to giving this book a rating, I would give it 4.5 magnifying glasses. I really liked this one. So that concludes this week's episode. I will see you guys back for next week's episode. We'll jump into the next book, The Legend of Miners Creek. So if you like Nancy going in search of long-lost gold mines, you're definitely going to like this one. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at truedrewpodcast.